An old couple paid $12 for the boarded-up schoolhouse nobody wanted. What they found inside wasn't just a building. It was a secret they would spend the rest of their lives protecting, a secret that would one day fall to me. This is the story of that inheritance. And if you've ever felt lost, or like you've been handed a puzzle with half the pieces missing, I want you to stick around. Hit that subscribe button, because we're going to figure this out together. The air in the state office tasted like recycled paper and quiet desperation. It was a taste I knew well. For 6 years, it had been the flavor of my life, the backdrop to every review, every placement, every time a social worker with tired eyes told me what my future was supposed to look like. But today was different. Today was my 18th birthday. It wasn't a celebration. It was an expiration date. I was no longer a ward of the state. I was just expired. A carton of milk left at the back of the fridge. Ms. Albright sat across the metal desk from me, her posture as rigid as the filing cabinets that lined the walls. She wasn't unkind, just worn smooth by years of other people's tragedies. She slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. "This is it, Leo," she said, her voice flat. "Everything from your file. Birth certificate, social security card, your final placement report. And this," she tapped a smaller, more brittle-looking envelope nestled inside the larger one. It was yellowed at the edges, my name written on the front in a looping, unfamiliar script. "This came for you about 10 years ago, from a law firm. We were instructed to hold it until you turned 18-inch. I stared at the name on the envelope. Leo Vance. My name. It looked foreign, like something belonging to a character in a book. In the system, you're mostly just a case number and a first name. Vance was a ghost, a name tied to parents I couldn't remember and grandparents I'd only known through whispers and faded photographs. My grandparents? I asked, my voice barely a crackle. Ms. Albright gave a noncommittal shrug. The law firm represents their estate. That's all I know. The system doesn't like loose ends, and my grandparents were the loosest end of all. They've been my guardians for the first 5 years of my life. I have flashes of memory from that time, like sunspots in my vision. The smell of sawdust and baking bread, the rough texture of my grandfather's hand, the low hum of my grandmother's singing. Then a car accident. That's what they told me. A quiet country road, a patch of ice. After that, the memories stop and the file begins. I was placed in foster care and they were gone. The file said they had no assets, no will, nothing to leave behind but a 5-year-old orphan. I pulled the old envelope out. Inside was a single, heavy, antique-style key, its head shaped like a small, ornate clover. There was also a folded, crinkling document. A deed. I unfolded it carefully. The paper felt like a dried leaf, ready to crumble. At the top it read, "Deed of transfer for property located at 114 Sparrowhawk Ridge." Below that, a mess of legal jargon, but 2 things stood out. The names of the grantees, Arthur and Ilara Vance. My grandparents. And the purchase price, $12. $12. I said out loud. Ms. Albright leaned forward, peering at the document. That's a quitclaim deed, looks like, usually used to clear up title issues or transfer property between family members. Sometimes the dollar amount is just a formality. Still, $12 is odd. She leaned back, her duty done. There's a bus ticket in the main envelope. Good for one way to a town called Havenwood. That's where the property is located. There's also $500 in cash. That's your severance, Leo, from estate. It's all we can do. $500, a one-way ticket to a town I'd never heard of, and a key to a property my dead grandparents apparently bought for the price of a few gallons of gas. This was my inheritance. This was my fresh start. I walked out of that office and didn't look back. The city air felt thick and heavy, full of exhaust fumes and the noise of a million people who didn't know I existed. I held the key in my pocket, its cold weight a strange anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. I wasn't sad. I wasn't happy. I was hollowed out, a space waiting to be filled. For 2 hours, I sat at the bus station, watching people greet their families with hugs and tears, watching them go somewhere they belonged. I had a ticket to Havenwood, a place I'd never been, and a key to a building I'd never seen. It wasn't a home. It was just a destination. The bus ride was long, a slow bleed from gray city concrete to the deep greens and browns of the countryside. I watched the world through the smudged window, feeling like a ghost passing through. The other passengers were a mix of college kids and tired-looking workers, their conversations a low hum I didn't try to decipher. I kept my hand in my pocket, curled around the key. It was the only real thing I owned. What kind of place costs $12? A shack? A patch of dirt? The deed had a description. The old Blackwood Schoolhouse and associated grounds. Approximately 2 acres, a schoolhouse. I pictured a little red building with a bell on top, like in a children's book. It felt absurd. My grandparents were simple people. My grandfather was a carpenter, my grandmother a librarian. They weren't landowners. They were renters, always. The file was clear on that. No assets. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across rolling hills, the bus pulled into Havenwood. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a gas station, a diner, and a small general store. A handful of houses were scattered nearby, their lights beginning to glow in the twilight. It was quiet, the kind of profound quiet that feels like a pressure in your ears after years of city noise. I was the only one who got off. The bus hissed and pulled away, leaving me alone in the cool evening air. The directions from a map I'd looked up online were simple. Sparrowhawk Ridge was 2 miles out of town, a winding dirt road that climbed into the hills. I hoisted my single duffel bag onto my shoulder and started walking. The walk was steep. The air grew colder, cleaner, smelling of pine and damp earth. There were no street lights here, and as the last of the daylight faded, the world was reduced to shades of gray and black, the silhouettes of trees stark against a sky littered with more stars than I had ever seen. It was beautiful and terrifying. I was completely, utterly alone. I found a turnoff for Sparrowhawk Ridge, a gravel path barely wide enough for a car, and followed it upward. My legs ached. The $500 felt like a thin, useless shield against the vast, dark wilderness around me. What was I doing here? Chasing a ghost story based on a $12 deed? I could have stayed in the city, found a shelter, tried to get a job. But the key in my pocket felt like a promise, or maybe a dare. It was the only thing that felt like it belonged to me, the only thread connecting me to a time before I was a case number. After what felt like an hour, the road leveled out, and I saw it. Set back from the road, half swallowed by overgrown woods, was a building. It was larger than I'd imagined, a long, one-story structure made of dark, weathered wood. It wasn't red. It was the color of a thundercloud. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse, and every window was covered with thick sheets of plywood, nailed shut against the world. A thick, ancient-looking chain was wrapped around the double front doors, secured with a rusty padlock. This was the Blackwood Schoolhouse. This was my inheritance. It looked less like a home and more like a tomb. I dropped my bag on the weed-choked gravel and walked slowly toward the front steps. The wood groaned under my weight. I touched the plywood covering the nearest window. It was rough and splintered, the nails driven deep. This place hadn't been opened in a very, very long time. I looked at the padlock on the chain. It was huge, a slab of rusted metal that looked like it could stop a tank. My heart sank. The ornate little key in my pocket was for a door lock, not this. Of course, it was another dead end, another cosmic joke. I almost turned around right then. I could walk back to town, wait for the morning bus, and just go. Go where? I had no idea, but anywhere had to be better than this derelict, forgotten place in the middle of nowhere. But then my fingers brushed against something carved into the plywood next to the door. I ran my hand over it, feeling the rough grooves. It was a letter, an E, and next to it, an Alara and Arthur. My grandparents had been here. They had boarded this place up themselves. Why? Why buy a broken-down schoolhouse for $12 just to seal it like a sarcophagus? Frustration and a strange surge of defiance washed over me. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I owed it to them, to the 5-year-old boy who lost them, to find out why. I walked the perimeter of the building, pushing through thorny bushes and thick weeds. The plywood was on every window sealed tight. But around the back, I found a smaller door, maybe a service entrance. It was also boarded up, but the wood here was softer, more rotted. I pulled out the small pocket knife I always carried. It wasn't much, but it was a tool. I wedged the tip of the blade into the space between the plywood and the door frame and pried. The wood groaned and splintered. It was slow, exhausting work. I jabbed and twisted, using my body weight to lever the board away from the frame. A nail screeched as it pulled free. Then another. My hands were raw, my knuckles scraped and bleeding, but I didn't stop. I was fueled by a cold, hard anger I hadn't realized was in me. An anger at the state, at my faceless parents, at the universe that had left me with nothing but a key and a riddle. Finally, with a loud crack, a corner of the plywood broke free. I could see the door behind it now. It was solid oak, with a simple black iron lock. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand was shaking as I slid it into the keyhole. It fit. It turned with a heavy, grinding click that echoed in the silent night. The door swung inward into absolute, suffocating blackness. The air that rolled out was thick and stale, a smell of trapped time, of dust and decay, and something else, something faintly sweet like dried flowers. I stood there for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had no flashlight, no candle, just the pale, thin light of the stars. I took a deep breath, tasting the dust on my tongue, and stepped across the threshold. I was in. The inside was a vast, cavernous space. The starlight filtering through the cracks in the boarded windows wasn't enough to see by, but it gave the darkness a shape. I could make out high ceilings and the hulking forms of what looked like old desks, all pushed to one side of the room. The floor was wooden planks, and they creaked under my feet with every tentative step. I moved slowly, my hands outstretched, feeling my way through the cold, still air. My fingers brushed against a wall, then a chalkboard, its surface gritty with ancient dust. This had been the main classroom. I fumbled in my bag for the small box of matches I carried. I struck one. The sudden flare of light was blinding. In that brief, flickering orange glow, I saw the room clearly for the first time. It was huge. The desks were indeed piled against the far wall, covered in thick, white sheets of dust that looked like snow. At the front of the room stood a teacher's desk, a great, solid block of oak. The chalkboard behind it was covered in faded, ghostly handwriting, the remnants of a lesson taught decades ago. The air was filled with floating dust motes, dancing in the matchlight like tiny fairies. The match burned down to my fingers, and I dropped it, plunging back into darkness. I lit another. I needed to find a lamp, a candle, anything. My eyes scanned the room. On the teacher's desk, I saw it. An old kerosene lamp. My hope soared and then crashed. The chances of it having any fuel after all these years were zero. Still, I made my way to the desk, stumbling over an overturned chair. I picked up the lamp. It was heavy. I shook it gently. I heard a slosh. My breath caught in my throat. It was almost full. It was as if someone had left it here, expecting it to be used. My hands trembled as I lit the wick. The flame caught, sputtered, and then grew into a steady, warm, golden light that pushed the oppressive darkness back into the corners of the room. I carried the lamp and began to explore. The schoolhouse was more than just one room. A short hallway led to two smaller rooms in the back. One was a primitive kitchen with a hand-pump sink and a massive cast-ironwood stove. The other was a small bedroom containing a simple metal bed frame, a small wooden dresser, and nothing else. It was all covered in that same layer of thick, undisturbed dust. Everything was neat, orderly, but frozen in time. It looked like someone had simply walked out one day and never come back. But why leave a full lamp? Why board the place up so thoroughly if you plan to return? It made no sense. I went back to the main classroom, the lamplight casting long, dancing shadows. The teacher's desk drew me in. It was the heart of the room. I ran my hand over its surface, leaving a clean streak in the dust. I tried the drawers. Locked. All of them. My heart sank again. Of course they were locked. Everything in my life was locked. I sat down in the dusty teacher's chair, the lamp on the desk in front of me, its light a small, warm island in the vast, cold room. I was tired. So deeply tired. The exhaustion of the day, of the past 6 years, settled on me like a physical weight. I had pried my way into this place, but I was no closer to any answers. It was just an empty, forgotten building. Maybe the $12 had been an overpayment. I rested my head on the desk, the old wood cool against my cheek. And that's when I saw it. A small, brass button, almost invisible against the dark wood, tucked away on the underside of the desktop. It wasn't part of the original design. It had been added. I hesitated for a second, then pushed it. I heard a soft click from inside the desk. I pulled on the top drawer again. This time, it slid open silently. My breath hitched. The drawer wasn't empty. It contained a single object, a large metal lockbox. It was heavy, military grade by the look of it, painted a dull olive green. It wasn't locked with a key. It was secured by a combination dial. A combination. It was hopeless. I could be here for 1,000 years and never guess it. I felt a surge of despair, so sharp it was like a physical pain. I had come all this way. I had gotten inside. I had found the secret drawer, only to be stopped by this. It was too cruel. I almost slammed the drawer shut, but my eyes caught something else. Taped to the bottom of the drawer, almost hidden in the shadows, was a small, folded piece of paper. My fingers trembled as I peeled it off. I unfolded it. On it were 6 numbers, written in that same familiar, looping script from the envelope. August 14th, 55, a date. August 14th, 1955. I looked at the lockbox. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I turned the dial. Right to 08. Left past 08 to 14. Right to 55. I pulled the latch. It clicked open. For a moment, I just stared at it, unable to move. The air in the room felt thick, charged with anticipation. This was it. This was the reason for the $12, for the boarded-up windows, for the key I'd been given. I lifted the heavy lid. The box was filled to the brim with envelopes, bundled together with faded ribbon. And on top of the first bundle was a single, unsealed letter. The envelope simply said, "For Leo." I lifted it out. The paper was thick and creamy. I pulled out the folded pages and began to read. The words were my grandmother's, but it felt like I was hearing her voice in the silent room. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then you are a man, and the world has taken us from you long ago. I am so sorry. I am sorry for every day we missed, for every birthday without a cake, for every scraped knee we weren't there to kiss. Please know, my darling boy, that not a moment went by when you were not in our hearts." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. I hadn't cried in years. The system teaches you not to. Crying is a weakness, a vulnerability that can be exploited. But here, in the dusty silence of this forgotten place, the words on this page broke through every wall I had ever built. I had to stop and wipe my eyes on my sleeve before I could continue reading. "You must have so many questions," the letter went on. "Why this place? Why did we leave you? There is no easy answer, Leo, but I will give you the truth. Your grandfather, Arthur, and I did not die in a car accident. That was a lie we constructed to protect you." The lamp flickered. The world outside the small circle of light seemed to shrink away, and the room became a stage for the words on the page. A lie? My entire history, the one foundational fact of my orphan life, was a lie. "We had to disappear," she wrote. "Years ago, before you were born, your grandfather worked for a large construction company, a very powerful one called Northwood Development. He was a master carpenter, their best foreman. They were building a dam upriver from here. It was a huge project, supposed to bring jobs and prosperity to the whole region. But Arthur found something wrong. He saw the blueprints, checked the material orders. They were cutting corners, using substandard concrete, fewer steel reinforcements than required. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his bones, that the dam they were building wouldn't last. A heavy flood, an earthquake, and it would fail. It would wipe out every town downstream, including Havenwood. I looked up from the letter, my mind reeling. I could hear the faint sound of a river somewhere in the distance. A dam. This story was suddenly much bigger than my own personal tragedy. Arthur went to his bosses. The letter continued. He showed them his calculations, his proof. They laughed at him. They told him to keep his mouth shut. When he persisted, they threatened him. When he still wouldn't back down, they fired him and blacklisted him from every job in the state. But that wasn't the end of it. They knew he had copies of the original blueprints and the falsified supply logs. He had the proof that could ruin them, could send them to prison. And they started to come after him. Not with lawyers, Leo. With men in dark cars who followed him home. With threats against me. And against your mother, who was just a teenager then. We ran. We changed our names, moved from town to town, always looking over our shoulder. It was during that time that you were born. Your mother, she was a beautiful, bright soul, but she wasn't strong enough for that life. The fear ate away at her. She left, promising to come back for you when it was safe. We never saw her again, so it was just the three of us. You were our whole world, our reason for keeping going. For 5 years, we had a fragile peace. We thought maybe they had forgotten about us. Then, one day, we saw one of them in town. A man from Northwood's security team. They had found us. We knew we couldn't run with a 5-year-old boy. They would catch us, and they would not be kind. They would take Arthur's proof, and they would make sure we never spoke of it again. We had to make a choice, the most horrible choice of our lives. We could keep you with us and put your life in danger, or we could disappear so completely that they would never find us. And in doing so, give you a chance to live. We chose you, Leo. We always chose you. I was sobbing now, great, shuddering gasps that tore through my chest. The grief I had carried for 13 years, a cold, hard stone of abandonment, was cracking open, and underneath was a pain so profound it felt like it would tear me apart. They hadn't left me. They had saved me. Their disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a sacrifice. We staged a car accident, left a burned-out wreck in a ravine. We knew the state would take you in. It broke our hearts, but we knew you would be safe. You would have a roof over your head, food to eat. You would live. We used the last of our money to set up a trust with a lawyer, with instructions to give you the key and the deed on your 18th birthday. And then we vanished. Which brings us to this place. This old schoolhouse. We found it years before, when we were first on the run. The county was auctioning it off for back taxes. Nobody wanted it. It was derelict, remote. Perfect. We bought it for $12. It was our secret hideout, our last resort. And it is where we hid everything. The original blueprints, the falsified logs, sworn affidavits from other workers who were too scared to come forward. Everything you need to prove what Northwood Development did. It's all in this box, Leo. It's all here. And that is your inheritance. It is not money or land, though this land is now yours. It is a choice. Northwood is more powerful than ever. They are a massive corporation now, with politicians in their pockets. The dam is still standing, a silent threat looming over thousands of people. You can take this evidence and expose them. It will be a fight. It will be dangerous. They will come after you just as they came after us. Or you can destroy it all, sell this land. They will pay you a fortune for it, just to ensure its silence, and walk away. You can live a quiet, safe life. You have earned that. You owe us nothing. The choice is yours, and whatever you decide, we will love you for it. Be safe, my darling boy. Know that you are loved. Always. Your grandmother, Elara. I'll let the pages fall from my hand. The lamplight seemed to dim, the room growing colder. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of their sacrifice, with the enormity of the choice they had left me. I looked around the room, at the dusty desks, the fading chalk marks on the board. This wasn't just a building. It was a bunker. It was a time capsule. It was the last will and testament of two people who had given up everything for me. I spent the rest of the night in that chair, the lockbox open on the desk before me. I didn't sleep. I sorted through the contents. It was all there, just as she'd said. Rolled up blueprints, the paper brittle with age, covered in my grandfather's sharp, precise handwriting, circling discrepancies. Stacks of shipping manifests with forged signatures. Notarized statement from 3 other men, their words filled with fear and conscience. It was a mountain of evidence, a bomb waiting to go off. And I understood the final piece of the puzzle. The land. Why would Northwood pay a fortune for 2 acres of remote woodland? I looked at the maps included in the box. Sparrowhawk Ridge overlooked the entire valley, including the river and the dam. This land was the perfect strategic location for any future repairs or expansions, or, more importantly, to control access to the site if the dam ever showed signs of failure. They didn't just want the land, they needed to control it. My grandparents had bought the one piece of ground that held power over their enemies. As dawn broke, sending pale gray light through the cracks in the boards, the choice felt less like a choice and more like a calling. Could I walk away? Could I take their money, the blood money offered to buy my silence, and forget? Forget the grandparents who had sacrificed their lives for me? Forget the people in Havenwood and all the towns downstream, sleeping peacefully while a concrete monster stood watch over them, a monster built on lies? No, I couldn't. I wasn't that 5-year-old boy anymore. I wasn't a case number. I was Leo Vance, son of Arthur and Alara, and this was my fight now. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach. I was 18 years old, with $500 to my name, up against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It was insane. It was impossible. But for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was and what I had to do. The decision settled a strange calm over me. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a thrumming energy. I had a purpose. I stood up and walked to the back rooms. In the kitchen, I found the hand pump. I worked the handle, and after a dozen dry sputters, water gushed out, cold and clear and tasting of iron and stone. I drank deeply, then splashed it on my face, washing away the grime of the journey and the salt of last night's tears. I spent the morning taking stock. In the kitchen pantry, there were canned goods. Beans, soup, peaches. All years old, but sealed. Survival rations. In the bedroom dresser, I found old work clothes belonging to my grandfather. They were too big for me, but they were clean and made of thick, durable denim. There was also a box of tools, a hammer, a saw, a pry bar. Everything I needed. My first act was to take the pry bar to the front doors. It was a declaration of war. I wasn't going to live in the dark, hiding behind my grandparents' fear. I was going to let the light in. The nails on the thick plywood boards groaned and shrieked as I worked them loose, one by one. It was brutal, physical work, and my muscles screamed in protest, but with every board that came free, I felt stronger. Finally, the last one fell away with a crash, and I stood blinking in a torrent of morning sunlight that flooded the dusty room. The light transformed the space. It was no longer a tomb, but a hall of ghosts, filled with dancing dust motes and the promise of a new day. I could see the details now. The intricate carvings of birds on the wooden support beams, the faded mural of a world map on one wall, the scuff marks on the floor where generations of children had sat and learned. This place had a history. It had a soul. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. I swept away the thickest layers of dust, opened the huge windows to let the fresh air circulate, and wiped down the surfaces. I found a stack of old firewood next to the stove in the kitchen, dry and seasoned. As evening fell, I built a fire. The stovepipe drew perfectly, and soon a comforting warmth spread through the kitchen and into the main room. I heated up a can of beans and ate them straight from the can, sitting at the great oak desk, the lockbox beside me. It was the best meal I had ever had. I had a home. It wasn't a house, not yet. It was a project, a fortress, a headquarters. But it was mine. The next morning, I walked back into Havenwood. The town looked different in the daylight. People nodded as I passed, their expressions curious, but not unfriendly. I went to the general store. A bell chimed as I entered. An older man with a kind, weathered face stood behind the counter. "Help you with something?" he asked. "Just need some supplies," I said, grabbing a basket. I bought bread, eggs, coffee, a new flashlight, and a cheap prepaid phone. As I paid, the man looked at me more closely. "You new here?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Staying up on the ridge, are you?" "Saw the light from the old schoolhouse last night. Haven't seen a light up there in 20 years. It's mine now," I said simply. "My grandparents left it to me." His eyes widened slightly. "You must be in Vance boy, then. Arthur and Alara's grandson. My God, I am Bill. I knew your grandparents. Good people. We all wondered what happened to them. And to you. A dam of emotion built in my chest. He knew them. This was the first person I had met who remembered them as real people, not just names in a file. They were, I said, my voice thick. That place has been sitting empty forever, Bill said, shaking his head. We all figured it was lost to the woods. Then about 10 years back, some fancy lawyers from the city started sniffing around, wanting to buy it. Offered a crazy amount of money. But the deed was tied up in some trust, couldn't be sold. Guess that was for you. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. That was Northwood Development, son. They're the ones who built the dam. They own pretty much everything around here now, except that little patch of land you're standing on. You be careful. They don't like loose ends. His words were a confirmation and a warning. The fight was real, and it was here. Thanks, Bill. I will be. I walked out of the store with my supplies and a new sense of connection. I wasn't entirely alone. There were people here who remembered. People who knew the truth, even if they were too scared to speak it. Back at the schoolhouse, I activated the phone. The first and only call I made was to the number on the letterhead from the law firm that had been holding my inheritance. A crisp, professional voice answered. Davies and Finch. My name is Leo Vance, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm calling about the estate of Arthur and Alara Vance. I've received the documents, and I've found what they left for me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, the voice, softer now, said, Mr. Vance, we've been waiting for your call. My name is Robert Davies. My father was your grandparents' lawyer. I've been managing the trust. I need to ask you, have you made a decision about the contents of the inheritance? I have, I said, looking at the lockbox sitting on the desk. I'm not selling, and I'm not running. I'm going to finish what my grandparents started. Another long pause. I could hear him breathing. I see, he said finally. My father always said Arthur Vance was the most stubborn, principled man he ever met. It seems he passed that on. If you're serious about this, Leo, you need to understand what you are up against. Northwood is a leviathan. They will try to crush you. I know, I said, but they don't know what's in this box. Not for sure. And they don't know about me. Very well, Mr. Davies said, a new energy in his voice. Then our firm will represent you, pro bono. It's what my father would have wanted. The first step is to get the evidence authenticated. Do not let it out of your sight. I'll start making some calls. There are journalists, engineers, people who might be willing to listen. But you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly. We talked for another hour, laying out a tentative plan. When I hung up, the sun was high in the sky. I felt a surge of terrifying, exhilarating hope. I had allies. I had a plan. The path ahead was dark and dangerous, but for the first time, it was a path I was choosing to walk. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work and quiet preparation. I cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, patching the leaky roof with tar I bought in town, replacing the broken panes in the windows, and sanding the old wooden floors. I was bringing the place back to life, and in doing so, I felt like I was bringing myself back to life. I learned how to split wood, how to cook on the old stove, how to live with the rhythm of the sun and the seasons. The physical labor was grounding, chasing away the ghosts of my past. The lockbox became my constant companion. I never let it out of my sight. At night, I would study the blueprints, read the affidavits, trying to understand the full scope of my grandfather's discovery. His careful notes showed me how they had used a cheaper, more porous concrete mix, how they had skipped entire sections of rebar reinforcement to save money. The structure was a shell, a facade of safety. The expert reports he'd commissioned, also in the box, confirmed it. The dam had a projected lifespan of less than 50 years under ideal conditions. It was now 40 years old. One afternoon, a sleek black car I didn't recognize drove slowly up the ridge, pausing at the end of my gravel path before turning around and driving away. It was a message. They knew I was here. The quiet war had begun. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fear was back, coiling in my gut. I sat at the desk, looking out the large window at the star-filled sky, and I felt the weight of my grandparents' fear, the fear that had driven them into the shadows. Was I strong enough for this? And that's when I think it's important to pause. Because maybe you've been in a situation like this. Maybe you've been handed a burden that felt too heavy, a secret that was too dangerous, a choice that seemed impossible. You're standing at a crossroads, and one path is easy and safe, and the other is the right one, but it's going to cost you everything. If you're there right now, or if you've ever been there, I want you to know you're not alone. This community, right here, is for people who have faced those moments. Let me know in the comments if this is hitting you. Your story matters, and I promise you, I read every single one. Now, let's get back to that night. I sat there, watching the stars, feeling small and afraid. I thought about the easy path. I could call Mr. Davies in the morning, tell him I'd changed my mind. I could take the money. I could buy a small apartment somewhere, get a normal job, and disappear. No one would blame me. My grandparents themselves had given me that option. But then I looked around the room I had worked so hard to reclaim. I saw the clean floors, the sturdy desk, the warm glow of the lamp. This was the only place in the world that had ever felt like mine. It was built on a foundation of my grandparents' love and sacrifice. To sell would be to sell their memory, to sell their courage for my own comfort. And I knew I couldn't do it. My fear wasn't bigger than my love for them. It wasn't bigger than my duty to the people in the valley below. I wasn't just Leo Vance, the orphan. I was Arthur and Alara's grandson, and I would not let them down. The next day, I started my own preparations. I used some of my dwindling cash to buy a cheap laptop and a scanner. I spent days meticulously scanning every single document, every blueprint, every affidavit from the lockbox, creating multiple encrypted digital copies that I uploaded to secure cloud servers Mr. Davies had arranged. The physical evidence was my leverage, but the digital copies were my insurance. If they came for the box, the truth would already be out in the world, ready to be unleashed with a single email. A week later, Mr. Davies called. He had found someone, a retired civil engineer, one of the most respected in the country, who had a long-standing grudge against Northwood for a past project. He was willing to review my grandfather's findings, and he had a contact at a major national newspaper, a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist known for taking on corporate giants. "This is our shot, Leo," Mr. Davies said, his voice tense with excitement. "But once we send them the files, there's no going back. The clock starts ticking. Northwood will find out. They will come at you with everything they have. Send it," I said, my voice clear and calm. "It's time." The silence that followed was the deepest I had ever known. The world seemed to be holding its breath. For 3 days, I heard nothing. I worked on the schoolhouse, chopping wood, tending to a small garden I had started, but my mind was elsewhere. Every sound in the woods, every car on a distant road, made me jump. I was living on a knife's edge. Then, on the 4th morning, the black car came back. This time, it didn't stop at the road. It came up my gravel path and parked 50 feet from the front door. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with cold, empty eyes. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like power. He walked to my front steps and stood there, waiting. I opened the door. I didn't invite him in. "Leo Vance?" he asked. His voice was smooth, polished, but with an undercurrent of menace. "Who's asking? My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a senior vice president at Northwood Development. I'm here to talk to you about this property." "It's not for sale," I said. He smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "Everything is for sale, Mr. Vance. We know who you are. We know what you think you have. Let me save you a lot of trouble. We are prepared to offer you $5 million. For the property, the box, and your signature on a non-disclosure agreement that will last for the rest of your life. $5 million. The number hung in the air between us. It was an absurd, life-changing amount of money. It was freedom. It was safety. It was everything I had never had. For a split second, I saw the life I could have. The easy life. I looked past him at the hills, at the valley below. I thought of my grandparents giving up everything for a principle. I thought of Bill in the general store and all the other people living in the shadow of that dam. "You're too late," I said. His smile vanished. "What did you say?" I said, "You're too late. The information in that box isn't just in the box anymore. It's been sent to people who will know what to do with it. People who are much more powerful than a scared kid in an old schoolhouse." His face went pale. The mask of calm sophistication fell away, revealing a flicker of raw panic in his eyes. He had underestimated me. Everyone had always underestimated me. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed. "You've just made a very powerful enemy." "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "My grandfather already made that enemy. I'm just here to finish the fight." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned, walked back to his car without another word, and drove away, spitting gravel from his tires. I stood on the steps, my body trembling with adrenaline, and watched him go. I had done it. I had faced the monster, and I hadn't blinked. 2 days later, the story broke. It was the front page headline of the newspaper. "The ticking time bomb. How Northwood Development's greed put thousands at risk." The article was a masterpiece, weaving the technical data from my grandfather's blueprints with the human story of his sacrifice and my discovery. It was all there. The fraudulent documents, the expert analysis confirming the dam's instability, the sworn affidavits. My name was there. My grandparents' names were there. Their story was finally being told. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Northwood. Their stock plummeted. Government regulators launched a full-scale investigation. The CEO was forced to resign. Class action lawsuits were filed on behalf of the towns downstream. The Leviathan was wounded. My life, on the other hand, was chaos. Reporters camped out at the bottom of my road. My phone rang constantly, but I also received messages of support. Hundreds, then thousands of emails and letters from people all over the country. I had a home, built not just of wood and nails, but of courage and love. Life on Sparrowhawk Ridge is quiet now. The reporters are gone. The world has moved on to the next story. But for me, the story is just beginning. With some of the money from a settlement Mr. Davies won for me against the state for negligence in handling my grandparents' case, I've started restoring the old schoolhouse properly. Bill from the general store comes up sometimes with his son, and they help me with the work. The community that was once suspicious of the boarded-up building has embraced it, and me. We hold potlucks here now, in the big main room. It's filled with light and laughter. I kept the old teacher's desk, and a lockbox sits on my mantelpiece. It's a reminder of where I came from, and of the choices that define us. My grandparents chose to sacrifice everything for a truth they believed in, and for the grandson they loved. I chose to honor that sacrifice. And that's the real lesson here, isn't it? Inheritance isn't about what you're left in a will. It's about the values, the courage, the stories that are passed down to you. It's about what you choose to do with them. Home isn't 4 walls and a roof. It's a place where you know who you are. It's a place worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for what's right, or if you're still trying to find your own version of home, please hit that subscribe button. This channel is a place for stories like ours. Share your own experience in the comments below. I want to hear them. I want this to be a community where we remember that even when you feel lost and alone, you are part of a much larger story, and you have the power to write your own ending.
This is actually great because now we can call 2 habitats. Like build 2 habitats together. Also, keep forgetting that we have a portable generator now. I really should use it more. Let's see. Okay. Now that I think about it, I don't like the position for these, so we're gonna move them. I guess we can put some relics out. There we go. Okay, that looks better for there. Wondering where to put these. Maybe we put them upstairs. We need a good central exhibit right there too, but dark marble flooring. We don't have any of that yet, so okay, we'll move this one over. This fire pit right here. There we go. I think I have to bring someone to light it, which makes sense. Snail fossil, skull fossil, I think are good for those. And the jaw fossil, okay. You know, I kind of wish they had more fossils, not gonna lie. It would be cool. Also, hey Banana Pie. Thanks so much for the likes. Good to see you.